Welcome to the second episode of DeFiner's Office Hours AMA, DeFiner's bi-weekly hybrid Ask Me Anything show where we take questions from the community and conduct in-depth conversations with our team members and friends of the show. This week on Office Hours, we welcome Tom Short, a DeFiner advisory board member, advisor at Nex Cubed, a startup accelerator, and who is a consultant and an advisor that specializes in messaging, narrative, and strategy for startups. Tom, if you could give us a little background about yourself, give us a little intro, and tell us about your relation to DeFiner.
Sure, Adam, thanks. Glad to be here today and talk about DeFiner, my favorite crypto. I came to work with DeFiner as an advisor at Nex Cubed, a startup accelerator based here in San Francisco. DeFiner was just finishing up their other accelerator program with Techstars when Nex Cubed picked them up as part of our cohort of fintech startups. And we met in New York. This was in March of 2020, which many will recall was an interesting time to be traveling.
Yeah, I bet.
And a week later, lockdown started. Right. In any case, I met with Jason in New York, and ultimately we decided that we were a good team to work together on the messaging and pitch deck for DeFiner. And so a lot of the work at Nex Cubed involved helping the startups develop their value proposition and their pitch deck for both investors as well as client or customer pitches. And that's an area that I specialize in. I work on messaging. And that comes from 30 years working in business consulting, where I worked with my clients on developing complex solutions to enterprise class problems, and then working with them on how to roll those out and implement them. And that required an enormous amount of internal messaging. And it turns out that the pattern of messaging is very similar to a sales pitch, where you identify a problem statement and then you identify a better way to move forward and conclude with next steps. And that really is what we do when we do angel pitches. So, you know, we work with the startups on developing their decks so that they can unpack usually very complex technology in simple terms and then convince people to take action on it.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so you're new to crypto. What are some of your initial views on it when you first got involved with it, and have any of those evolved over time?
Well, I still am blown away by how ridiculously complex the crypto space is. I've been in and around tech for my whole career. I've usually been an early adopter of new tech. I have an engineering background. You know, I'm not afraid of tech at all. And when I look at crypto and try to understand it, and, you know, I've done some coding and I peel back the covers on what's going on in this space. And, you know,
right.
It's just,
going on.
There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot going on. And these projects, it blows me away, the breadth of people who are taking this on and starting these projects, and how steeped you have to be in this technology in order to imagine what these things might be, much less get them off the ground. So I feel like I'm really like playing catch up. It's a Rip Van Winkle moment where you wake up and it's 100 years later and you go, holy cow, where'd this come from? Only this happened in like 3 years, right. You know, or 10 anyway, if you start with Bitcoin.
Sure.
So yeah, but I've been playing catch up, and the DeFiner team have been very patient with me and helped me get up to speed. And of course, I'm doing a lot of my own reading and online tutorial and education and YouTubing and hanging out. And that's how you pick this stuff up.
Sure. And this is actually a hybrid show where we ask questions. We have the audience ask us some questions. And we did have one that came from the audience, if you don't mind me asking. What is your personal opinion on decentralized finance? Do you think that it could potentially overtake the traditional finance world, or do you think it'll become like a supplemental use case alongside traditional finance?
Well, that's a good question, and it certainly is one that a lot of people are pondering these days. I think it's still too early to tell. I think that a lot of that will ultimately have to do with the regulatory environment and how the regulatory environment evolves. There's a lot of money at stake on both sides. The traditional banking system is scared to death that the DeFi world in particular, but even the CeFi world, can operate in such a low cost fashion and offer virtually instant money transfers anywhere on the planet between any currency pairs. They can't match that right now, and they certainly can't do it at the cost level that the crypto space can. So consequently, the traditional banking system, TradFi, is, I think, going to push hard. You're going to see a lot of lobbying money flow into Washington to try to keep a lid on this, because I'm sure they are starting to see that this isn't going to go away as the market cap starts to get into the $1 trillion level for the TVL. If you look at companies like TransferWise, they're still a TradFi play, but they're taking advantage, I think, of some of the ACH approaches that are going to become part and parcel to the DeFi, CeFi crypto world. And I think already, even though they're a relatively small player, they're showing the art of the possible.
Right.
And that is happening, and that is operating in a regulatory environment that is the same as the banks operate in. And so you extrapolate that out to what the crypto world can do, and man, so I don't have a prediction about what's going to happen, because the regulatory world is shifting quickly and still very much in flux.
Right. Nex Cubed, can you tell us a little bit about the Accelerator program and kind of how you met Jason or China, maybe a little story behind that?
Well, as I said, I met Jason in New York at the Nex Cubed FinTech Kickoff, and that was for the first FinTech cohort that Nex Cubed had run. Somewhere along the way in our follow-up conversations, I worked with Jason in China for the next, I don't know, 3 months or so. That cohort ran 3 or 4 months into June. And along the way there, we talked about what is DeFiner's vision. What's your game plan for how you're going to achieve it? And there were a couple of things that Jason said that really struck me, and we incorporated some of this into the value proposition for DeFiner, as well as the pitch decks that we put together. And it had to do with Jason's view of what the window of opportunity for DeFi is. And that was that the banks, the TradFi banking system makes billions of dollars in profits by basically taking customer deposits and loaning them back out at a fairly high interest rate and paying the depositors virtually nothing. And Jason realized, as I think a lot of the DeFi industry realized, that we can do this for a lot less money in a secure fashion via the blockchain. And we can give 90% of the profits, as it were, the interest that we get paid for the loans, we can give 90% of that back to the depositors, and we can still make a lot of money.
Right.
And as Jason explained this to me, the light bulb went on, and I thought, wow, this has got the potential to disrupt one of the stodgiest, most conservative industries on the planet, the financial services industry.
Mm-hmm.
And that excited me. And having worked around large enterprises my whole career, that really, really got me excited and got my interest up on, gee, I want to help drive this. So the second thing Jason and China talked about, which sealed the deal for me, was when I talked to Jason about what's the long-term plan, Jason, you want to be like the biggest DeFi player, and what's the vision, 10 years? And Jason said, we don't want to be the biggest DeFi player. We don't want to be the biggest crypto player. We want to be the next JP Morgan. Well, that got me, because that spoke to this idea that there is a play to be made to displace the TradFi banking establishment with this DeFi and crypto stuff that he's working on. And again, as a newbie to the space, I didn't see that or understand that connection. Mm-hmm. But ever since we had that conversation, I've been tracking it and trying to keep an eye on what are the signals that tell me that's starting to happen or could happen. Mm-hmm. And it is pretty mind-blowing, because the power of this is there. I mean, this could happen, that could happen. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in our lifetimes. It's not 100 years from now. And so it's an exciting time to be in this space. And I'm pleased as punch to be working with these guys and the DeFiner team.
That's really interesting, Tom, because you've been around in startups for quite some time. You've worked at IBM, you've worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers. How has the landscape changed in the last decade or 20 years for startups?
Well, that's a good question. In terms of similarities to the beginning of the dot-com era, I was there. I had my first internet email account back in 1994. It was a university account. When the Netscape IPO came up, I begged my older brother to see if he could go through his financial advisor to get their hands on some shares of it.
Really?
Because I was convinced it was going to go. And it's hard to remember, and a lot of people perhaps listening to this weren't even around back then, or were too young to remember what was happening. But this IPO boom thing was not a thing back then. There wasn't this bubbly, frothy IPO unicorn mentality at all. It didn't exist. And it's hard to get your head around that. But, we're talking about 30 years ago, nearly 25 years ago. And we've kind of become accustomed to this idea that a company's going to IPO, and every once in a while you'll hear about $1 billion one, and it's the unicorn and all this kind of thing. Well, yeah, that now is a fairly routine event compared to back when Netscape IPO'd. And so obviously that's a giant change, but that's not a recent one. I think more recently, in terms of what I have seen in the startup space in the last, say, decade since I've been involved with it, I would say that the angel rounds are getting bigger, and we're talking about super angels and super VCs even, because those rounds are also getting bigger, Series A and Series B rounds.
Right.
There was a time when I was in a startup back in 2010, and we were chasing angels for 25 or 50K. And we were doing hardware as well as software, which is, big bucks stuff. And that was the amount of funding that we were going after back then. So that's changed, add a 0 or 2 to some of those numbers, because those numbers now are big.
Oh, very cool. What attracted you to working with DeFiner?
Well, we already talked about what excited me about, sticking with DeFiner as an advisor, and working with Jason and China and the rest of the team closely to help develop the messaging strategy and the marketing plan and that kind of stuff. Being the next JP Morgan, that gets me out of bed. I want to help that. I want to be that. Because it's exciting, it's disruptive, and I've always been about what's next and what's coming and helping to bring it to life. So I think DeFiner very much is in a position to be a player in that and to have a role in disrupting the financial services industry, and I want to help do that. In addition to that, I think that what I like about what I've seen of DeFiner's approach is it's a very thoughtful approach to building a startup. To the point where we are staying away from going out and trying to get as much funding as we can possibly get. The other thing that I really like about DeFiner, and I've come to appreciate about the approach we're taking, is it's a very thoughtful and planful approach to growth, as well as to securing funding. This space is red hot right now, and people are constantly making offers to come work for us or to sell us whatever it is they're selling to help us grow or to get on board and fund us.
Right.
And to that I say, if you want to fund us, then buy FinToken. But apart from that, I like the fact that Jason and China and Osama are taking a very planful approach to growth and are not just taking on every offer they get to, bring an angel in or get VC interested or whatever. There's a time and a place for that in our roadmap. And when it's time to go get funding, we are going to go after it hard. But that's just one example of, it tells me that we have a thoughtful, planful team in place that will drive this company forward in a sustainable fashion, rather than a flash in the pan that people forget about in a year's time. And I don't want that to be DeFiner, and neither do Jason, China, Osama, and the rest of the team. So I think that's what we're building here, and I feel really good about that.
Have another community question, and it kind of goes into this whole idea about DeFiner and why you work with us. But the question is, can this project be trusted?
Well, I've got my money in it. I've got an account with DeFiner, and I have funds deposited in my DeFiner savings account. I have my MetaMask wallet linked, and as we get the lending platform up and running and the full release of the platform, I expect I'm going to put more money in. And so I trust DeFiner. And I never once have wondered whether one day I'm going to wake up and the money that I've got in there now is gone. And I'm a Midwestern boy, so I grew up very conservatively in terms of fiscal, care and due diligence. And I wouldn't put any money into this, nor would I put my time in it, frankly, if I didn't trust DeFiner and the team that's leading it.
Well, I guess the question is, how do you decide to work with somebody, and what is the process once you decide to work with that person?
Thanks. Well, the decision to work with somebody is based on a couple of points. The most important one, I guess, is, do I think there's anything I can do to help them? The second thing is, do I care about the business they're operating or building? Usually it's building. And three, do I like this person? And I'm in a position now where I get to make my own rules. And if I have a issue with any one of those three, then chances are I'm going to walk away. So yeah, that's how I decide to work with them. And in terms of what do I do with them, and the approach I take is I want to pick them up where they are. So when I work with my startups, I spend a good deal of time up front talking to the founders and finding out where they're up to and what their challenges are. And this could be at any level, well beyond anything to do with marketing, branding, positioning, go to market kind of questions, which is kind of where I try to add value. But another place I add value is in those discussions, we'll often stumble on strategic questions that transcend just pure marketing. And in a couple of cases with other startups I've worked with, we've ended up pivoting them a bit in terms of their overall business strategy. And it's because as I ask questions, which is what I'm really good at, I end up getting the startups to think about their business in ways they hadn't considered, or uncovering a challenge that they weren't even aware existed that changes how they think about their business. And to me, that's so important because you've got to build your house on a strong foundation. And those foundation stones are often quickly thrown together because the founders have an idea that they found they could run with, and they go after it, and they start building the second floor before they've even, finished the first floor. And the foundation is still wet. So, I try to go back to that foundation and take a really hard and close look at it, because that's how I understand businesses. It's not because I'm trying to be a nuisance. It's I can't get my head around a business unless I start in the basement and work my way up. And that's how I learn. And in the process of me satisfying my own curiosity and learning, that's where we start to uncover, if there are issues, we'll find them. And also we start developing a storyline for a narrative that ends up becoming the core of their marketing strategy and messaging. And that's usually what I'm brought in to help them develop.
Question for the community for Tom. There's a lot of sort of projects that get abandoned, that have been abandoned in the space, and a lot of rug pulls that have happened. We want to kind of get on your take on the sustainability specifically of DeFiner and how we're working, and that we're definitely not someone that's about to abandon our project.
Well, I wouldn't be involved with this if I thought that this was a short-term effort, or one that the founders were going to walk away from after a year and not becoming internet billionaires. I didn't join it for that. The team has, I think, grown in a very sustainable way. We've brought on some great developer talent, marketing talent in you.
Thank you.
We have great UI design. So we're building a good team, and we're doing it in a planful way, as I said earlier, that gives me a high level of confidence that DeFiner is real and is in it for the long haul. And as I said earlier, I wouldn't have my money in it if I didn't believe it was trustworthy or going to be around for a while. So I feel very good about the team we've got, and the quality of the people we're bringing on. It's really going very well in that regard, and I'm excited about what we've got in the pipeline and what's coming live. And I encourage people to stay tuned for the announcements that in the next few months. We have some exciting stuff coming.
Yeah. Okay, Tom. Do you see any roadblocks for DeFiner in the near future? If so, what are they, and what can we do to get out in front of them for the near future?
I don't know that I see any roadblocks that DeFiner is facing or at risk of running into that the rest of the DeFi and/or crypto industry won't also encounter.
Right.
I don't see necessarily roadblocks, but rather perhaps areas of risk. Regulatory being the chief one that I'm tracking, as an advisor and as someone who's interested in seeing how this plays out in a macro level over the long term. I want to see a sustainable DeFi industry emerge. And I want to see one that has the staying power as well as the innovation behind it to truly change how we think about banking and financial services. And so we talked earlier, about the fact that there are forces on both sides of the question of how hard should we regulate this, how slow or fast should we allow things to proceed. And so to me, those are really important areas to keep track of and wherever we can to influence them. Okay. And so those are the things I'm watching. But as far as roadblocks per se for DeFiner, I don't see any that all the other players aren't facing as well.
Okay. We have another community question, Tom. What are your general thoughts on the crypto market right now, just in terms of where we're at? We're at a bull run, it seems. Do you have any hot takes on where we are?
Well, I don't have any money in Bitcoin. Every time it hits a new high, you can't help but feel woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Right.
When it was 10,000, I thought it was a little irrational.
Right.
So what do I know? Because I remember when it was at 1,000. I remember when it was at 500. So, yeah, I don't have any hot takes on it. I don't think anybody does. I think that the multi-trillion-dollar TVL takes us out of infancy and into adolescence in terms of the fear of what we call in hardware design, infant mortality. In other words, this thing isn't going to fall over tomorrow. At least that's what we hope.
Yeah.
So no, I don't have any hot takes on it. I think that the early warnings, if there are any, of impending doom will come from the regulatory side of things, either in the U.S. or abroad. But the U.S. seems to be the most conservative player right now in terms of the big money countries that are playing in this space. We're the laggards. And yeah, but apart from that, no, I would not offer any predictions or prognostications on that front.
So last week we published an article about the Coinbase IPO, and our thesis for it was that this could be a potential watershed moment, or what some have called the Netscape moment for crypto. Do you see any sort of similarities to where we're at now with crypto, specifically the Coinbase IPO, and how the internet was when sort of the .com bubble took off, but also gave us companies like Amazon, eBay, and Google? Do you see any sort of similarities as this potentially being a watershed moment for crypto, specifically the Coinbase IPO?
Well, yeah, a lot of people made those comparisons in the crypto media and blogosphere about Netscape and that with Coinbase. It is a watershed moment with regard to crypto, and so there is some perhaps analogy or similarity to be drawn to the Netscape IPO and the beginning of the .com. Of course, we all know what happened in Netscape.
Yeah.
you know, the sleeping giants woke up and ate their lunch, really. I mean, you know, so Microsoft decided, you know, I think we might throw a little bit of software out there and call it a browser. And suddenly we had Explorer,
Right.
you know, and then Netscape, what? You know, and so the question would be, is there a vision or a possibility of something like that happening in the crypto world? And I guess the question is well, you know, who's the Microsoft player at this very moment that would reasonably see a crypto play as a logical addition to their portfolio that is not currently a player, you know? And you know, you mentioned Amazon. I think, you know, the question I'd be asking is someone like Amazon or Google a logical player in this space, the sleeping giant that wakes up, you know, or is there a big bank that's a sleeping giant that wakes up and suddenly goes, instead of being against this, we're going to do a 180 and get behind it, you know? And could they then suddenly become the on-ramp of choice and the broker of choice for crypto transfer and trading that Coinbase has staked out a space in? And I don't know. If I did, I'd be buying somebody's stock right now, I'll tell you, or shorting somebody's. But it certainly is an interesting time to play those kind of scenarios out and see where they lead one's, you know, in terms of, well, what's the future hold, and what is it, what are some possible scenarios that are believable? And that's how I tend to look at all this stuff, is I'm not going to hang my hat on any one truth. I'm going to look at, well, what's possible? And if I can come up with 4 or 5 realistic possibles, I'm going to watch those and maybe bet on one when it looks like one's starting to become the dominant one.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this, Tom. I just have one final question for you. Can you leave us with some sort of pearl wisdom or alpha for the community, for the DeFiner community? Some words of wisdom for us?
Buy Fin and HODL.
You heard it here, folks. Buy Fin and HODL, please. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it.
All right.